Hi, everyone. My name is Michelle Suazo. I am the webcast administrator with the Water Research Foundation. I would like to welcome everyone to the first webcast of 2025. And this one is Diversifying Water Portfolios through Stormwater Capture and Use, contributing to a water resilient future. Before I hand things over to Dr. Harry Zhang, I wanted to run through our housekeeping slide quickly. So you can submit questions at any time throughout the presentation through the question box. We will hold all questions and do a Q&A at the end of the presentation. The slides and the recording will be available on the www.waterrf.org website. So feel free to go to the webcast page and you can find the webcast and all that information there. And you can also download the slide deck now on the left side of your screen. Once we change the layout, you'll be able to download the PDF of the slides at any time during the presentation. We will also offer a certificate of completion, which will be automatically generated after the webcast. If you happen to want to watch it on demand or pass it along to anyone, please have them reach out to me for that certificate if it's viewed on demand. And if you wouldn't mind just staying on to the end, we do have a survey. We'd love to get your comments and any feedback so we can continue to improve these as we go along. So with that, I am going to turn it over to Harry Zhang. Harry?
Thanks, Michelle. So my name is Harry Zhang. I lead the integrated water and stormwater portfolio at the Research Foundation. So I first like to take a few minutes to give you a summary of the Research Foundation, our project, or some activities relating to stormwater capture and use. So as a start, I want to maybe showing you, the holistic approach our Research Foundation has been using for stormwater and wet weather management. So the core is they have three pillars here. The first one is focus on the performance. You can think about stormwater BMP performance, runoff volume reduction, peak flow reduction, and then pollutant load reduction. Specifically, Research Foundation team up with partner organizations like American Society of Civil Engineers and also other federal agencies. I think we have this stormwater BMP database. Can give you some really rigorous performance data. And then the second pillar is on the cost. I think we emphasize life cycle cost, so not just a capital cost, but also like operation maintenance cost. So one example is really the Research Foundation effort along with EPA Office Research Development on this one called Classic Stormwater Life Cycle Cost Tool. Is a public tool. Is not part of the EPA Green Infrastructure Toolkit. So if you download click, those are BMP database and Classic, they have a link attached to it. So the third pillar is on the benefit side, specific on the benefit quantification. In some cases, people call the multi-benefit or co-benefit. So you're going to hear more on that through this webcast. Just want to show you some of the research product I think you can take away. So the first one is on the International Stormwater BMP Database 2020 Summary of Statistics. This is a sort of a latest version and also have a very lots of summary statistic table and also the two different type pollutants, nutrient, phosphorus, nitrogen, and also the sediment and the metal, other thing in there. One of the key information I want to mention here, the BMP database also including rainwater harvesting and also SEO stormwater capture and use studies. And also we team up with American Society of Civil Engineers, Environmental and Water Research Institute. We are promoting this operation and maintenance reporting parameters on the stormwater BMP database. Those documents are free available from the Research Foundation website. And also relating to that is urban BMP operation maintenance cost database. So you can take a look. So this is a two more research product I want to show to you. One is on the sort of addressing state of knowledge of the research need for stormwater harvesting. Second one is on the focus on microbial risk and also impact of the stormwater capture and use. So this is my second to last slide. So I want to take a little effort showing you the benefit of quantification is also important when you talk about SCU or stormwater management in general. So we have a two complete report here. So I think I want to quickly show you sort of, you're going to hear more later on from speaker Janet. I think so. There's three pieces here coming from quantifying social, financial, and the environmental aspect of the green infrastructure, as also as play a key role in promoting stormwater capture and use. So my last slide, trying to show you Research Foundation have two complete report. One is on the focus on the economic framework and also supporting tools for quantifying triple bottom line benefit of the green stormwater infrastructure. The other one is specifically as a follow-up, there's a case study to the quantification, benefit quantification. So we suggest you to take a look at those reports. Yeah. So with that, I'm going to pass to Shannon for the presentation.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Harry, and welcome to all of our attendees today. We're so excited to be sharing our findings with you for the Water Research Foundation Project 5236. This is our agenda as we are moving through it, and we look forward to answering questions, and we'll keep tabs of those in the question and answer box. So here we are starting out, and Harry did such a nice job of talking about some of the existing work that the Water Research Foundation has supported around stormwater capture. I also wanted to highlight two more publications that our body of work is also built on. One of them is the Pure Potential, which looks at the nationwide opportunity for stormwater capture and use and was part of the Water Reuse Action Plan, as well as looking at the untapped potential of stormwater, not only in California, but also as part of a national assessment that was run by the Pacific Institute. And let's see here, I'm getting used to the slides here. And so of this body of work, it really informed how our team thinks about the role of stormwater capture. And we originally started looking at the role of stormwater capture and how to tell the story of how to quantify the economic and volumetric potential of stormwater in the nation as we worked in Colorado. So work 5236 directly jumps off of the work in Colorado and says, if we can do this in Colorado with specific tools and methodologies, how can they be applied nationally? And so with that, we looked at the Colorado context to begin with. And the Colorado context is not so different from states and countries outside of Colorado. And one of them is, what is our reliable, where does our current water supply come from? How reliable is it? And as we look to the future, will we continue to have a reliable water supply? What are the constraints that we face? And what is the role of stormwater in diversifying that water supply? I think all of you may know and understand, but stormwater hasn't always enjoyed a really great reputation. And I would say we're right now at this point where in the very recent past, we see the shifting paradigm that the role of stormwater actually is shifting from a nuisance to a resource, to an asset that can contribute to our community's ability to thrive for those who work, live, play, learn, and recreate in an area. And so our team was especially excited to take the methodologies that we use to understand the potential for stormwater to contribute to thriving communities in Colorado and apply it nationally. Thus, here's our project, Water Research Foundation Project 5236, Diversifying Water Portfolios through Stormwater Capture and Use, contributing to a water resilient future. We're thankful for the support of our PAC. And also, it's worth mentioning that this work has also enjoyed the support of the Colorado Water Conservation Board, the Gates Family Foundation, and Denver Water. And through their support at the Colorado level, we were able to elevate this nationally and are thrilled to do this in partnership with the Water Research Foundation. The project objectives and how we landed with our outcomes and learnings were vetted, and we worked with a team of expert review panelists at the state level and then expanded their guidance to inform how we approach this at the national level. So our key objectives for this are to understand what is the legal landscape, to understand how, if and when you are allowed to capture, store, and reuse stormwater. And really, what is that volumetric potential? Is this a strategy worth considering for your specific geography? And then finally, let's talk about the economic feasibility of that, not just as of stormwater as a water supply, but let's consider the other co-benefits that can come along with that. And I'm thrilled that as we move through this, you will hear my colleagues, Morgan Shimabuku, Jane Clary, and Janet Clements speak to these. And then finally, with the research approach, I want to highlight before we jump into the methodologies, when you receive the slide deck, there are some links here. You can find the Colorado-based report, as well as this report for the Water Research Foundation. It is highly important to the project team that the concepts that we talk about and our findings that we shared were vetted by a diverse group of expert review panelists in Colorado and across the nation. And so that is a key component to the learnings that we're sharing with you today. And with that, I will hand it off to my colleague, Jane Clary, to begin to tell us about some of the opportunities and challenges when looking at the legal framework for assessing stormwater capture. Jane?
Thank you, Shannon. So Morgan and I are going to talk about the volumetric side of assessing stormwater capture and use as a water supply, and some of the constraints that we're aware of as we start thinking about this is uncertainty regarding the legality of the practice of stormwater capture and use. And that really varies from state to state, depending on what part of the country you're in. Another constraint is a lack of knowledge on the potential volume of stormwater available. You know, is this a water supply that we should, you know, could be a meaningful component of an overall water supply? Another constraint would be unquantified costs and benefits of stormwater capture. You know, is this something that will be cost effective? Is there, do you have a storage volume or a method to capture the stormwater that you are, that you want to put towards a beneficial use? And so one of the things we've tried to do in both the Colorado report and the WRF report are to address some of these constraints. And specifically, we've looked at the role of water rights policies, regulations like treatment requirements from health departments, estimating the volumetric potential of stormwater available for the water supply. And Morgan will get into some specific quantitative examples there. And then as we introduced, we'll also look at an economic analysis and an assessment of co-benefits that Janet will discuss later. So in Colorado, one of the big issues has been water rights, and we do have a prior appropriation doctrine that governs use of water in the state. And, you know, there are a lot of different, some myths, I think, about stormwater capture and use in Colorado. One is that It is actually legal for residential households to utilize 2 110-gallon rain barrels at their homes for irrigation use. So that is, in fact, legal based on a 2016 House bill. And then there's some other programs in place that have included supporting pilot projects to better quantify, how stormwater or rainwater capture and use compares to the historic natural depletions that would have occurred under natural conditions. And so there's one big one big state pilot project called Sterling Ranch that's in Douglas County. That's where a lot of good monitoring and quantitative analysis is being done. But for purposes of our Colorado-based study, what we did is to primarily work with the 110-gallon residential limit, look at that one first, and then kind of look at some scenarios from there. What if the limit went up to 500 gallons? What if there was no limit? Just to kind of get a bigger picture sense of, is the potential a big number, a small number? Is it a meaningful small number? And so one way, regardless of where you are in the country, you might want to develop a matrix that looks something like this. This is something that Dave Smith put together for the WRF 5207 report, but where you start to organize the different ways that you might want to implement stormwater capture and use. For example, are you looking at a larger scale project with offsite capture and use? Are you looking at surface water capture and use? Are you looking at groundwater recharge? Are you looking at something on site like rain barrels? Is it limited to outdoor use? Are you looking at indoor uses? And then other options from there. And then from there, you can also look at constraints related to permitting. We briefly mentioned treatment requirements and water rights, but this is a way to kind of initially frame what all do I need to be thinking about before I even start looking at quantifying the volumetric potential of stormwater. So the first step would be to identify relevant scenarios. And I mentioned previously what we did in Colorado, where we looked at the 110-gallon scenario limited to landscape irrigation, and then created some additional scenarios that Morgan's going to talk about. So one that I just mentioned was the urban stormwater runoff, rainfall from residential rooftops, and then for future urban development, and then opportunities that exist under legal constraints versus hypothetical scenarios, just to give you a sense of if regulations changed, what could a larger potential be in the future. And then for Colorado, we developed 3 main scenarios. One was for rainwater harvesting for the currently allowable 2 55-gallon residential rain barrels, a hypothetical 500-gallon residential rainwater harvesting, and then urban stormwater runoff from existing impervious surfaces that would include rooftops and from existing impervious surfaces without roadways. And then building on number 2, we looked at stormwater runoff estimates for future and new urban impervious areas. And so I'm going to hand this off to Morgan to dig deeper into these.
Thanks, Jane. So moving on. So the next step for estimating the volumetric potential that we took and are going to discuss is around developing the hydrologic methods and assumptions. So in that, the first question is identifying the stormwater runoff model that you would use to estimate how much stormwater would be coming from the geographic area of interest. Of course, the model you choose is going to depend on the objectives of your study, spatial and temporal scale, and data availability across the geography of interest. And we thought it important to note that many states and regions already have accepted stormwater runoff models for stormwater management purposes. And so that model may be sufficient, or something modifying those models may be sufficient for this exercise Our team in Colorado we actually built our own model, but used a regionally accepted runoff coefficient for applying to different surfaces, or coefficients for applying to different surfaces. Data-wise, there's a lot of publicly available data that can go into these models. Impervious cover, for example, the National Land Cover Database from the USGS, which is what we used in the Colorado example, and precipitation data we ended up using from the PRISM Climate Group, their historical rain data and precipitation data. And then in Colorado, an important factor, which may not be as important everywhere, but was elevation, as that can play a significant role in the form of precipitation, whether it's rain or snow. And for our study, we decided to look only at the time of year when there was rainfall. And so that differed by elevation. So we used an elevation model as well. And then, as we described, it was really important for us to investigate the rainwater available from residential rooftops. And so we also made some assumptions around roof size, as there aren't publicly available data sets, and we didn't have the time to do a geospatial analysis of roof size in the Colorado area, but that could be done. We had a capture efficiency coefficient that we used. We also used the 55-gallon rain barrel size and assumed that those rain barrels could only capture a certain amount based on head space and then dead space at the bottom of the barrel. We took about 10% off based on those assumptions. Also, rain barrel adoption rates. There's some literature out there discussing how rain barrel volunteer programs have gone. And so you can make some assumptions based on how many households you believe would be able to adopt and use rain barrels. And then storage and refilling, we made some assumptions based on days, what to do with rainwater that fell in sequence day after day, whether or not people would be able to use that, or if there was some spillover and things like that. The next step, of course, is applying the methods and across the scenarios and using the assumptions and data that you've collected into a model. What I have here, I just brought up from the report a conceptual demonstration of a stormwater runoff model. This particular one is from Second Nature, and it's called the Tool to Estimate Load Reductions, and it estimates stormwater runoff as well as pollution loading. Our model for the Colorado project just looked at the stormwater runoff, and like I said, we developed it ourselves, but there are options out there such as this, and what you choose, of course, like I said, is going to be based on your own particular constraints and interests. So the final sort of step in the volumetric potential analysis is really taking your results and contextualizing it in comparing it to water supply, whether that's to water supply availability or demand. And so the example I'm putting up right here is the comparison of the residential rainwater harvesting volumes compared to values from the state of Colorado water plan for residential outdoor demand. We chose this comparison in particular because at this time, the legal use of rainwater harvested from a rooftop is only for landscape use on a landscape. And then also because treatment requirements for that water would be quite low, if anything at all. So it makes sense in other ways as well. So in the table, what you're seeing is in Colorado, there are a number of river basins, and those major basins are shown there on the very left-hand column. And then in the first two columns, we have the residential outdoor demand baseline from the Colorado Water Plan, as well as future projected demand. That's the BAU 2050. And so you can get a sense of the volume of those residential outdoor demand numbers. And then we have our two scenarios shown here, one across a 10% adoption rate of two 55-gallon rain barrels, and one at a 50% adoption rate. And so, as you can see from the numbers below those two scenarios, the residential rainwater harvesting volumes are quite small. They do vary across basins, in large part determined by amount of urban area and number of residential households in those basins. But overall, it's a quite small percentage, no more than 1.2% of the baseline demand for rainwater harvesting at these adoption rates. The next slide, before I pass it on to Janet, is another demonstration of a comparison we did. And this is looking at the actual stormwater runoff volume from most urban surfaces in the state of Colorado. The two blue bars that you see in this graph, so again, this is showing results by basin across the bottom, or for the whole state at the total line on the far right, in acre feet per year. So the blue are those residential outdoor demand values again, and we use those here as well because the most likely use case of any sort of stormwater capture is going, in Colorado at least, is still going to continue to be outdoor use. And so we thought this was still a useful comparison. And then also because of the treatment. Again, it's much cheaper to use stormwater or to use a water that may not be as clean for something that doesn't need as much treatment like an outdoor use. And then so on the graph, as I said, the blue bars are that those values from the Colorado Water Plan, and the green values are the stormwater runoff volumes at two different levels, looking at just 10% of surface area, one with roadways and one without roadways. So kind of scaling things back to see what looks more feasible. So with that, I will now pass this over to Janet.
Thank you, Morgan. Hello, everyone. I'm Janet Clements, and as Morgan and Shannon mentioned, I am going to talk through some of the economic aspects of thinking about stormwater capture and use. Hold on, can everyone? Yep. Sorry, it looked like my video is off. So as part of the WRF kind of framework that we developed, the overall objective was to help communities recognize that there can be significant benefits associated with stormwater capture and use, as well as for stormwater management agencies and kind of broader communities. But at the same time, there are often some significant economic /funding/financing challenges associated oftentimes with implementing stormwater capture and use. If you're thinking about it as kind of a siloed approach for a water utility, for example, it can be expensive. It can have high costs. Because of in many cases, depending on the type of stormwater capture and use that you're doing, there can be it can be located on private property. There can be concerns about cost recovery and financing, et cetera. And then oftentimes it can be viewed as a stormwater problem rather than a benefit to water utilities. So thinking about, well, who's really going to pay for this? Who should be managing this stormwater? So for those reasons, it's obviously very important to think about, okay, what's the business case for overcoming these challenges? How can we put together a strong business case with outcomes that inform decisions that can facilitate multi-benefit projects related to stormwater capture and use? So the first steps, and I'll talk through these in subsequent slides, is really to think about, okay, what are the benefits of different kind of stormwater capture and use scenarios? How do we think about the expenses? And then thinking about not only how can we fund or finance this, how can we kind of cost share based on these overall benefits? So in Colorado, we obviously were limited a bit on the types of stormwater capture and use that we're talking about. In Colorado, for several reasons, legal reasons primarily, we didn't spend a lot of time looking at things like, large underground injection projects that would enhance drinking water aquifers, et cetera. We were really limited mostly to look at, large cisterns and, of course, the rain barrels, which are currently allowed under Colorado law. So our list of benefits might look a little bit different than, water utility benefits or stormwater benefits in other parts of the country. But this type of stormwater capture and use can result in water supply benefits in the form of, potable water offsets, or it can contribute to kind of the overall water supply portfolio in a community. Because of that, when you offset, potable water, you're no longer treating that water at a centralized facility. That can result in energy savings. You're not pumping it to customers. That can also result in energy savings, which can then also, in turn, result in air quality improvements. In Colorado and some studies I've been involved in recently in California, we're also looking at the potential for larger size tanks at individual households to help reduce fire risk. And provide kind of a way to, during red flag events to wet vegetation and keep homes a little bit safer. There's also some research that shows there's kind of an educational value or conservation ethic benefit associated with stormwater capture and use. And then at a larger scale, when you're implementing things like large scale stormwater capture, that can also reduce localized flood risk. Next slide here. The benefits, I've already alluded to this a little bit, but the benefits associated with stormwater capture and use depend on a lot of things. So whether you achieve these benefits depends on, for example, the types of projects. So you see cisterns in this picture. Those are going to have different benefits than, larger scale green infrastructure projects, as I mentioned. How much you can store, and how the water is used. Even with cisterns like this, we've seen doing some work elsewhere in the country, looking at buildings that are capturing both rainwater and gray water or black water and combining those to meet indoor demands for flushing and cooling water purposes, et cetera. So those are going to result in some different benefits compared to, smaller tanks that are just used for outdoor irrigation purposes. This is an issue in the West, particularly, depending on the climate and when the rain falls and is captured, and of course, when you need to irrigate outside and when that is demanded, that obviously is going to affect the benefits. And in Colorado, we were able to account for those differences in timing of capture versus demand. So if you remember just a couple slides ago, I showed a slide that had kind of the list of benefits that we looked at in Colorado. And one of those first benefits was, a water supply benefit. So if you're thinking about stormwater capture and use kind of at the household or commercial level, there's obviously a benefit to those households or businesses that are implementing or installing cisterns or rain barrels, for example. That can result for them, if they're not purchasing that potable water supply, that obviously reduces their costs, right? So the benefit kind of accrues in the form of reduced water costs. There's obviously a benefit to utilities as well, because they no longer have to pump that water. But if you look at the overall benefit and value it based on, okay, what are the avoided retail costs, that kind of captures the value to both utilities and households. Households experience the benefit in the form of reduced bills. And then, the utility is no longer incurring costs. What we found in Colorado is, the benefit's actually relatively small. Just when you're thinking about, okay, what's the cost of that, reduction in potable demand? It ranged, from about $847 per acre foot in the Rio Grande watershed. So if you remember Morgan's table of all the different basins that we looked at, Rio Grande was one of them. And then the Arkansas basin had the highest kind of retail costs for water, close to $2,500 per acre foot. But at the household level, especially in Colorado, looking at current legal limitations, you're not getting anywhere close to an acre foot. So per household, it's a relatively small benefit, but can add up and can still be important. I think the more important thing to think about when we're thinking about at a higher level, how are we really capturing the value that stormwater as kind of an additive source or an additional source or a source of water that could potentially enhance reliability? How does that really add value to our overall water supply portfolio? So for example, when it is an additive source of supply or reduces the risk of a shortage or reduces the risk of or reduces kind of a gap, in Colorado in the water plan, there is a kind of a projected gap, and there's different ways for kind of closing that gap. And so thinking about how individuals value water and what are the impacts of those shortages or risks really kind of starts to kind of portray the broader value of stormwater capture and use. One way to think about that when you're thinking about the water supply benefits from kind of a water utility perspective has kind of been, the traditional approach is not just, what are we saving in terms of household water costs, but what are we avoiding at a broader scale? So, if we're able to make a significant, as Jane said, kind of a meaningful, even small difference in the amount of water that's kind of offset from a utility, what are we avoiding in the future? Does that allow us to defer investments in alternative supplies? And so that's one way as economists we often think about, okay, what's the true value of this kind of enhanced reliability? So this is an example. This is actually just numbers from a California study that was done by the Public Policy Institute of California, looking at the cost of different supplies. And of course, this is going to vary by community. But if you can see, I don't think you can see my mouse, but if you can see the third bar in is stormwater capture. So in this particular example, in the state of California, it can be a relatively cost-effective source of supply relative to things like desalination, brackish desalination, non-potable reuse, et cetera. So thinking about putting it in the context and its cost effectiveness is, again, an important thing to think about when we're looking at overall value. I think there's some interesting kind of things to also think about when we think about the value of water. Obviously, us in the water industry, we know that water is invaluable, but we're not, when we're thinking about stormwater and ways to enhance the water supply portfolio, we're more thinking about it at the margins, right? We're not thinking about, we're going to run out of water for basic human needs. But one thing that stormwater can do is enhance outdoor water supplies. I was involved in a study a number of years ago, looking at how much people value the ability to have a reliable source of supply for outdoor watering. And I think what was really interesting about that study is that most people, if you say, in a given year, if there's a drought restriction and they're only allowed to water maybe 2 days a week, even sometimes 3 days a week, most people don't care. And not that they don't care, but they're not really willing to pay to say, oh, I want to water every day. Most people are okay with what we usually call stage 1 drought restrictions. But when you start to get up to further restrictions, you can't water at all. You can only water 1 day a week. People do kind of start to say, okay, I'd be willing to pay to enhance our overall water supply portfolio to be able to rely on that water to have access to outdoor water use. So we did a study looking at a number of cities and doing some comprehensive surveys and looking at, well, what are people willing to pay to avoid drought restrictions in a given year? And one of the cities that participated in that study was Denver. And although it's not much, if you look across households, you can start to see that even a small amount, people in Denver are willing to pay close to $30 per year to avoid 1 year in the next 20, and it can be hard to follow, but 1 year in the next 20 of stage 2 drought restrictions. And when you kind of do the math and run through it, that equates to a value of about $9,000 per acre foot. So to the extent that stormwater capture can kind of ensure that or knock the edge off drought restrictions, maybe keeping in any given year from going from a stage 2 to a stage 1, there is a value there. And I know that, and I think this is important to note that, this also needs to be paired with kind of new perspectives on how we use, especially in the West, how we use turf and how we water our lawns. But we do, it's just a kind of a different way to think about how people value different uses of water. One of the things we also looked at in Colorado is because in Colorado, stormwater could help to close certain gaps and make water available for other uses in the future, because there is a projected shortage under kind of our business as usual scenario in the water plan. One thing to think about is, what is that water worth in terms of kind of economic activity? So we looked in the South Platte Basin, which is covers Denver, Colorado, and a lot of the area around there on the Front Range of Colorado. And we looked at so-called water-dependent industries within that basin. And we found that they contribute significantly to the local economy. You can kind of see some of the stats here. Water dependent industries are defined, and WRF has done quite a bit of research on this, and other organizations, but they're defined, obviously as industries that are highly dependent on water. So a lot of manufacturing, there's kind of a specified list, at least that we work with. There's a lot of manufacturing industries, things like breweries, wineries, where water is really, the beverage industry is an important input into their processes. So in Denver, or in the Denver area, South Platte Basin, water dependent industries account for about, a third of economic output and close to 30% of regional, gross regional product. So obviously these are important industries. And when you think about the value, how they value water supply and reliability of those supplies, it can kind of highlight how important having a reliable supply is to the local economy. So one thing we did in Denver is we looked at some research, and we said, there's a lot of research out there that, and this is kind of depicted in a simplified way in the graph that you see on the right-hand side of your screen there. What this shows is up to about 15% water shortage. Most businesses can kind of deal with that. So the gray line that you see there are at the bottom, you kind of see water shortage percentage. So there's a zero, it goes from 0% to 15% kind of water shortage up to 25%. What we see, the gray line is jobs, and the blue line is economic output. So this looks at the jobs and economic output lost associated with different levels of water shortage. And what we see is that, when you start to get to 15%, obviously there's kind of a dramatic shift in the impacts. So most industries can kind of deal up to 10 to 15%, and then we start to see some real economic losses. So in the South Platte metro area, again, we used an economic modeling tool to look at, okay, well, what would be the impacts? There is a 20% gap projected under the business as usual scenario. We found in the Colorado study that a larger scale stormwater capture scenario could reduce that gap to 15%. So going, a 5% kind of reduction. And the 10% capture scenario is one of the larger scale scenarios we looked at. Obviously, again, we're limited in Colorado by what we can do. But what we found was between that 15 and 25%, every 1% decrease in that gap has a significant economic benefit in terms of economic activity. Every reduction in shortage has about a $20 billion in the local economy in terms of direct and indirect effects. So that's obviously very significant. And again, stormwater is not going to fill that gap, but it can help to reduce risks associated with shortage. And of course, in Colorado, it can help at the margins. So real quickly, there's obviously a lot of other benefits associated with stormwater capture and use. In Colorado, one way to think about that is, we're putting in all these stormwater capture and use. What's the kind of avoided cost in terms of, what would be avoided? How can we reduce water quality projects that would otherwise be needed? And we looked at each basin. We said, okay, well, if we didn't have this stormwater capture and use scenario, how much would it cost to put in other stormwater measures, stormwater management measures? And we looked at, compared those costs to bioretention. And you can see kind of the value, the avoided costs associated with stormwater management because of stormwater capture and use. We also looked at a number of other potential benefits. We used FEMA valuation methods to look at the potential value of reducing fire risk at fire-prone homes. That you see on the right-hand side of your screen is census tracts and their fire risk potential, or the potential of fire in any given year, with red obviously being the higher. This is Colorado, but with red obviously being a higher risk. There's also educational and cultural benefits. A lot of the literature shows that with rain barrels, it's a little bit mixed as to whether those are really kind of the gateway drug that people seem to think they are. But there is, some evidence from the literature that shows things like a sustainability premium associated with stormwater capture and use. People are willing to pay more to live in a building that has sustainability elements like water reuse, like rainwater harvesting and use. And there's some evidence even that, including those elements can increase property values or rents by up to 11%. And that's really just an indication of how much people are willing to pay to have those kind of amenities or kind of a green factor where they live. And then finally, how does this all come together? So I've kind of went over a whole host of benefits, examples of what we looked at in Colorado. There are additional benefits that people can achieve through stormwater capture and use, and particularly kind of more nature-based approaches. But I think this is really cool. I know there's a lot of numbers here, but I want to just kind of walk you through the quadrants of this spreadsheet. This is a tool that my colleagues and I developed for the for use by the Metropolitan Water District of Southern California to look at the potential of investing in different stormwater capture, use, and kind of green infrastructure landscape transformation scenarios. And the intent of this tool was to be able to look at the benefits not only to MWD, the Metropolitan Water District, but also LA County, the organization in charge of stormwater management in that area, or one of the stormwater management agencies. In Southern California, there's also a lot of retail water agencies. Metropolitan Water District is a wholesale water supplier. So we wanted to look at, okay, say if you start down here on the left, if you look at the left bottom quadrant, you can see there's a host of different kind of interventions. And we said, if you look at the green cells, that's where you input something. So we say, if you invest 60% of funding of a program into these different BMPs, so the first one is single family landscape transformation, which includes stormwater capture and potable water supply offsets. There's some cisterns built in there as well. And then we go up to the upper left and we say, well, what if MWD wanted to invest $50 million? Yeah, you can see in that green cell. So given those program components and the level of funding the Metropolitan Water District would provide, we estimated all the different benefits associated with that program. So you can see water supply is the dark blue, stormwater capture is the lighter blue. Those account for, more than 60% of the total benefits, but there's also a host of community benefits. And what this tool does is says, you're able to kind of look at the benefit distribution and say, based on those benefits, if you look back at the upper left-hand corner here, there's several cells that look at the cost distribution for MWD, for stormwater agencies, for retail water agencies, et cetera. And you can say, well, based on these benefits, we're going to assign about 30% of the cost to a stormwater agency and 40% to MWD. We'll kind of split the community benefits, et cetera. And at the end of the day, what it does is kind of shows, this project on a per acre foot basis may not be cost effective if MWD were to do it alone. But when you're pairing with a stormwater agency and splitting the cost based on benefits, what you see in the bottom right-hand corner is kind of the final costs. In this case to MWD, you can see that if they did it alone, it would be over $4,100 per acre foot. But when you start to think about splitting up the cost based on benefits and doing these multi-benefit projects, that cost reduces for MWD to about $1,600. So compared to a siloed approach, everyone's kind of chipping in, reducing overall costs and resulting in lower costs ultimately for customers. And that at that cost kind of comes competitive with other alternative supplies for MWD. So that's my presentation. I'm going to hand it back to, I believe it's Shannon who's next.
Yeah, thanks so much, Janet. I'm just going to give kind of a quick snapshot of some of our key findings and recommendations for future research, and then we're going to jump into questions. So as you can imagine, what we've talked about today is an adaptive framework that's meant to be applied in the geography in which you live, serve. And in doing that, some of our key findings when we looked more closely at these opportunities, and I actually, for the practitioners who are with us today, I don't think these will come as surprises to you, but that it would be very important to support the integration of co-benefits into our water management and investment decisions. So, and we'll go to one of the questions that has popped up, but what do the benefits look like and what is their value beyond water supply? How can that benefit a community's ability to consider incorporating stormwater into their water supply portfolio? And then the next key finding really looks at creating the enabling conditions that contribute to safer, more water resilient communities. And this one is very partnership oriented and collaboration oriented. And some of the things that Janet talked about today, when you look at benefits that can come from stormwater capture to that are water quality benefits, erosion control benefits, community-based benefits, there are opportunities for co-funding and joint implementation across agencies. So that's something that is well worth exploring. And then really digging into looking at the context of where these are being considered. So a more detailed assessment of co-benefits at the appropriate or regional local scale and the different types of stormwater capture and use are really worth exploring. We've highlighted many outdoor uses, and I know one of our questions was about that, saying what are the indoor use opportunities? And Morgan answered that in the chat. But really to be cast that net wide as far as the different types of ways that stormwater can contribute to local resilience and augmenting existing water supplies. So those are some of the key findings there. And then, like all research, you start digging in and you see there are gaps. And so understanding the opportunities for stormwater capture at the regional level would be highly beneficial. And then digging into the real and perceived barriers to implementing stormwater capture projects. And I'll say some of those are a robust understanding of the water rights and water laws that influence those decisions. When we started this conversation in Colorado, there were people in the stormwater community that said water rights prohibits you from collecting stormwater. Well, that in fact is not the case. It's just the specific context. And so really, those real and perceived barriers can stop something in its tracks. So really, there are a couple other opportunities here to dig into recommendations for future research. But with that, we will go ahead and dig into some questions. And I think with this, we're all going to go on camera here, and I will start off the Q&A. And actually, Jane, I would love if you would take on question number 3. Do you know of any entity that has tried using an EPA swim approach for the runoff analysis? And it says here in the Calgary area, Alberta, we have very large stormwater capture and use projects done first of all to address hydro modification impacts with the water availability as a secondary benefit.
So, hi, Bert. The answer is we have not used EPA swim for that purpose. But I did want to comment a little bit about what we did use in the Colorado study, because it might be an approach that might be of interest to you, because kind of the general approach was ArcGIS Pro was used for the geospatial analysis. And then we had about 32 years of precipitation data with the PRISM data set that went into our analysis. And then we combined that with a national land cover data set to look at imperviousness. And then with some R scripts, kind of integrated that all together using Bob Pitt's volumetric runoff coefficients. And I'm pretty sure you're familiar with his work, but we kind of put all those pieces together so that we could look at the basin scale benefits, kind of a coarser big picture look. But you could probably also do that at a smaller site scale too. But that was the approach that we used. So I didn't directly answer your question, but I think that there may be some related information of interest. And then Harry also wanted to note that the classic tool does use SWIM as a key component underneath that. So that might be something that you might want to look at in terms of another WRF tool that has utilized SWIM.
Thank you, Jane. Harry, would you like to address question 4 for us, which is it safe to capture rainwater that's fallen right after a wildfire?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I think the short answer is most likely no. I guess so. The more rigorous answer is like you should do some testing. I want to mention there's some ongoing research foundation project, I think, on wildfire research. Some project I think cover specifically like those kind of characterization. For example, not for the ash and also related runoff. I think there's some data in there as well, and also in the Colorado, I think there's several research universities have done lots of work on that as well. I think the last point, I think really some of the wildfire happen on the forest area. I think one of the work research focus on Pacific Northwest wildfire. I think if you tackle those kind of forest area with a source water thing in there, I think that not only you need to do some testing, potentially a certain level of treatment you may need to be doing. So that's, the general answer would be no. Yeah, so, yeah.
Thank you so much, Harry. And then Morgan, when we talked about looking at that volumetric opportunity, how are in-stream flows for aquatic life support worked into the allocations?
Yeah, thank you. I think this is a really important question, and where it really comes up, at least in the Colorado context, was in the water rights consideration. So I think every state's going to have a different way of managing and ensuring sufficient supply or flows for in-stream. And that is going to have to be something that each sort of location reviews themselves to ensure that stormwater capture is not harming in-stream flows and environmental flows. And so I'll just say that for our project, we were focused more on quantifying that volumetric potential coming off of urban spaces, not and within the water rights context and water ensuring that the whole system was maintaining the balance that was necessary under there. And it is, though, something that of course needs to be brought into any analysis that's done. So that's what I'll say.
All right, thank you so much, Morgan. Jana, I'm going to ask you to answer number 7. You did address avoided costs in your presentation. Were avoided costs for various sources for the full treatment of potable standards incorporated as part of this, or can you kind of reiterate how this might be incorporated?
Yes. So when we look at the avoided cost, it was assuming that it be treated to MS4 permit standards in Colorado, and it was really kind of a more high level analysis, and it's really intended to kind of reflect the value of controlling stormwater for water quality purposes. There are a lot of issues, in particular, in Colorado, because we're limited to rain barrels. They don't always achieve the intended outcomes. And so you do need to kind of take that into account. But the avoided costs that we're looking at did kind of look at the full cost of treating to the standards that they needed to be.
Thank you so much, Janet. I'll take a couple more questions. It might put us 1 or 2 minutes over, and then we'll wrap it up from there. So actually, I want to get to this question here, number 9, and I'll put this out to who would like to answer this, but it's regarding water quality benefits. Do we consider the fate of the water that is collected and used? I mean, saying, after all, contaminants just don't disappear. And I want to say, I know we looked at that water treatment at the Colorado level, and then, but would someone like to address this for our kind of view of this at the national approach? Or I can fill in some.
I guess.
Okay, go.
I think, yeah, I think, water quality is a big consideration when it comes to any kind of water, and considering what kind of end use you're applying it to. Of course, if you want to water food crops or a garden, you're gonna want to be sure that the water you're using is clean. So in situations, I know down, for example, in California, where the where they are capturing and using stormwater, the contaminants are removed before they, in some places, before they recharge aquifers with it. So I think every sort of use case, there's going to have to be appropriate levels of treatment and removal before it's applied. So it's going to be dependent on that end use and what you need.
Yeah, thank you so much, Morgan. Oh, sorry,
I
go
could
ahead,
just
Jane.
add a little plug in there too that we could put in follow-up Q&A, but Sybil Charvel led a great report for WRF that looks at treatment requirements. That is a good reference on that topic.
Yeah, absolutely. And then I want to answer a question here, number 11, to co-benefits, and maybe if you want to add something on, Janet, here. But the question is, could lowering the price of groceries for households by implementing home gardens irrigated with stormwaters be considered a plausible benefit? And I'd say food production is one of the co-benefits that has been included in multiple communities, including in LA County and the St. Paul region, in Minneapolis or Minnesota. And also there are other benefits there as well around healthy food access and lifelong healthy eating habits and research to back that up. Janet, did you want to add anything else to that?
No, I think it absolutely could. You know, when you're thinking about quantifying benefits, though, you also have to ensure that there's a program or structure in place that's actually going to achieve that benefit. So if it's a program specifically targeted for that purpose, and you can make assumptions about how many people adopt it, et cetera, then absolutely, I think that could be that could be something that's quantified.
Great. And I'm going to close out with our final question here, so we're not too far over. For the purpose of our panel here, it's question number 15. And it's saying there was a mention of temporal differences between periods of high outdoor water use demand being different from periods of rainfall. How was the considered approach for the Colorado example? And I bring this up because this was a great conversation and very extensive for how this was measured. A lot of rigor went into this. So I'm excited for Morgan and Jane to address this. In Vancouver, as the water falls in the winter and outdoor water use spikes in hot, dry summers, what are the options to incorporate or consider? So Morgan, Jane, would you like to lead off on that one?
Well, I mean, I would say it's about storage and what your options are to store that water for future use and whether that cost is something that is viable. And I would say in Colorado, we were, you know, for our analysis, our kind of summer rainstorm monsoon season is during the landscape irrigation period. And so and it would enable, you know, smaller scale storage that can fill and empty and then be used for landscape irrigation.
Yeah, I don't have anything to add. It just highlights that your geographic considerations are going to vary and help determine sort of what end uses you apply this water to.
Great. Thank you so much. And with that, we'll conclude the presentation portion of our webcast, and I'll hand it back to Dr. Harry Zhang.
Yeah, just want to thank you, everyone. I think thank you for the panelists and also the presentation and also the audience. I think I just want to mention to the audience, so the final report of this project was already published, so you can go to the website, download it yourself. And also this team actually have one ongoing project. So maybe you're going to see us maybe half a year or a year from now again. So with that, I'm going to say thank you, everyone. Yeah, have a nice day.